Welcome to Books and Storytime by mybooksummary.com. Get ready. Navigate for quick wisdom of countless stories. Let's dive into the world of knowledge together and explore story of Hansel and Gretel. Once upon a time, in a little village nestled at the edge of a vast, dark forest, there lived a poor woodcutter with his wife and two children, Hansel and Gretel. The woodcutter's house was small and shabby, with a roof that leaked when it rained and walls that creaked in the wind. It sat on the outskirts of the village, right where the trees of the forest began to whisper their secrets to one another. Now, Hansel and Gretel were a clever pair of children. Hansel, the older brother, was a quick thinker, always coming up with plans and ideas, even though they didn't always work out as expected. Gretel, the younger sister, had a heart as warm as a summer day and a smile that could light up even the gloomiest corner of the forest. Together, they were an unstoppable duo, like peanut butter and jelly, or maybe more like cookies and milk. Life in the woodcutter's home wasn't easy. You see, the woodcutter, as kind and hardworking as he was, didn't earn much from chopping wood, and times were tough. So tough, in fact, that sometimes there wasn't even enough bread to fill all their tummies. And when a particularly harsh winter came along, bringing cold winds and empty cupboards, the woodcutter's wife, who wasn't Hansel and Gretel's real mother but their stepmother, began to worry. Now, when grown-ups worry, they sometimes say things that are quite unthinkable, things that make you wish they'd just stop talking and have a nice cup of tea instead. One night, as the woodcutter and his wife were lying in bed, she turned to him and whispered, "We don't have enough food for all of us. The only way we'll survive is if we take Hansel and Gretel into the forest and leave them there. They'll be able to fend for themselves, and we'll have just enough to get by." The woodcutter, shocked and heartbroken, protested, "How can I abandon my own children in the forest? They'll be lost, frightened, and alone. I can't do it. I just can't." But the stepmother, who was as cold as the wind outside, insisted, "It's the only way. If we don't, we'll all starve." And with that, she convinced the woodcutter to go along with her terrible plan. What they didn't know was that Hansel and Gretel, who were tucked away in their little room next door, had heard every word. The siblings lay wide awake, their hearts pounding in their chests. But Hansel, being the quick thinker that he was, came up with a plan. "Don't worry, Gretel," he whispered to his sister in the dark. "I'll think of something. Just go to sleep, and in the morning, I'll have a way to keep us safe." The next morning, before the sun had even peeked over the horizon, the stepmother shook Hansel and Gretel awake. "Get up, you lazy children. We're going into the forest to gather wood," she said in a voice that was as cheerful as a soggy sock. Hansel, who had been thinking hard all night, quickly got up and went outside. While everyone was busy getting ready for the day, he quietly gathered a pocketful of small, white pebbles from the path leading to their house. He slipped them into his pocket and returned inside just as the stepmother called out, "Let's go. We need to leave before the sun gets too high." The woodcutter led the way into the forest, his axe slung over his shoulder, his heart heavy with sadness. Hansel and Gretel followed behind, with Hansel secretly dropping the pebbles one by one, creating a trail that sparkled in the early morning light. The stepmother, of course, had no idea what Hansel was up to, and she marched along with a smile that was as fake as the plastic fruit in the village market. Deeper and deeper they went into the forest, until the trees grew so tall and thick that they blocked out the sunlight, casting long, eerie shadows on the ground. Finally, the woodcutter stopped by a small clearing and said, "Children, wait here while your stepmother and I go and gather wood. We'll be back soon." But Hansel and Gretel knew better. They watched as their father and stepmother walked away, disappearing into the forest. The moment they were out of sight, Hansel took Gretel's hand and said, "Don't worry, Gretel. We'll follow the trail of pebbles I left behind. It will lead us straight home." Sure enough, the pebbles gleamed in the moonlight like tiny stars on the ground, guiding them back through the forest. The journey took hours, and as the sun began to set, they finally reached the safety of their home. The woodcutter was overjoyed to see his children alive and well, but the stepmother, well, let's just say she wasn't quite so thrilled. But as the days passed and the cupboards grew emptier and emptier, the stepmother's heart turned colder and colder. she decided to try again. This time, Hansel and Gretel overheard her plan once more. But when Hansel sneaked out to gather pebbles, he found that the stepmother had locked the door to prevent him from doing so. "What do we do now?" Gretel asked, her voice trembling. Hansel, ever the resourceful one, whispered, "Don't worry, I have another plan. Let's just get some sleep, and we'll figure it out tomorrow." The next morning, just like before, the stepmother woke them early and marched them into the forest. Hansel, without his pebbles, had to think fast. As they walked, he broke off little pieces of bread from the small loaf they'd been given for breakfast and dropped them on the ground. "This will work," he thought. "We'll follow the crumbs back home." But what Hansel didn't count on was the forest's many, many residents, particularly the birds, who had a special fondness for breadcrumbs. By the time Hansel and Gretel were left alone in the forest, the crumbs had all been eaten up by a cheerful gang of sparrows and robins, who chirped happily as they flew away. "Now what?" Gretel asked, trying to keep the fear out of her voice. Hansel looked around, realizing with a sinking heart that his plan had failed. "I don't know," he admitted, "but we can't just sit here. We have to find a way out." The two children wandered through the forest for hours, hoping to stumble upon a familiar path. But the deeper they went, the more lost they became. The trees seemed to whisper and creak, as if they were sharing secrets with one another. The shadows grew longer, and the forest grew darker, until it felt like the trees were closing in on them. Just when they were about to give up hope, Hansel and Gretel saw a faint glow in the distance. They hurried toward the light, and to their astonishment, they found a little house standing in a clearing. But this wasn't just any house. This house was made entirely of candy. The walls were made of gingerbread, the roof was covered in chocolate tiles, and the windows were framed with candy canes. Even the chimney seemed to be dripping with sugary icing. "Well, if this isn't a dream come true, I don't know what is," Hansel exclaimed, his eyes wide with wonder. Gretel, who was just as hungry as Hansel, nodded eagerly. "Do you think it's safe?" she asked, though her mouth was already watering. Hansel shrugged. "It's made of candy. How dangerous could it be?" Without another thought, the two children rushed to the house and began nibbling on the delicious walls. Hansel broke off a piece of gingerbread, while Gretel licked the icing from the windowsills. They were so busy eating that they didn't notice the door slowly creaking open. Out stepped an old woman, her back hunched and her eyes twinkling like the sugar on a freshly baked cookie. "Well, well, well," she crooned in a voice as sweet as honey. "What have we here? Two hungry children, nibbling on my house? Why don't you come inside, dearies, and I'll make you a proper meal." Now, Hansel and Gretel were clever children, but they were also very hungry and very tired. So when the old woman invited them in, they didn't hesitate. They followed her inside, where the smell of fresh-baked bread and cookies filled the air. The inside of the house was even cozier than the outside, with a warm fire crackling in the hearth and shelves lined with jars of candy and sweets. The old woman, who seemed kind and caring, served them a delicious meal of pancakes, sweetened milk, and juicy berries. Hansel and Gretel ate until they could eat no more, and then, feeling drowsy, they let the old woman show them to a pair of soft, warm beds. But as soon as the children fell asleep, the old woman's sweet demeanor changed. You see, this wasn't just any old woman. She was a wicked witch with a taste for children, and now that Hansel and Gretel were under her roof, she had no intention of letting them go. The next morning, Hansel and Gretel woke up to find themselves in a terrible predicament. Hansel was locked in a cage, and Gretel was forced to do chores for the witch. The witch, cackling with glee, revealed her plan. "I'm going to fatten you up, my dear Hansel, and when you're plump enough, I'll cook you in my oven and feast on you," she croaked. Gretel, horrified, tried to keep her brother safe by bringing him only the tiniest portions of food. But the witch wasn't so easily fooled. Every day, she would order Hansel to stick out his finger so she could feel how plump he was getting. However, Hansel, being the clever boy he was, used a little trick. Instead of his finger, he stuck out a thin bone he found in his cage, and the witch, whose eyesight wasn't very good, believed he was still too skinny to eat. Days turned into weeks, and the witch grew impatient. "I don't care if you're not plump yet. I'm going to eat you anyway," she shrieked one morning. She ordered Gretel to light the oven and prepare it for baking. Poor Gretel, her heart pounding with fear, pretended she didn't know how to work the oven. "Oh, dear witch," Gretel said in her sweetest voice, "I'm not sure how to light the oven. Could you show me?" The witch, too eager to think clearly, hobbled over to the oven. "You silly girl, it's easy," she snapped and bent down to peer inside. That's when Gretel saw her chance. With all her might, she gave the witch a push, and the old hag tumbled headfirst into the oven. Quick as a flash, Gretel slammed the oven door shut and bolted it. The witch screamed and banged on the door, but it was no use. Soon, the cottage fell silent, and the air filled with the smell of something burning. Though Gretel didn't stay to find out what, she rushed to Hansel's cage and unlocked it, freeing her brother. "We did it, Hansel. The witch is gone," she cried, tears of relief streaming down her face. Hansel, overjoyed, hugged his sister tightly. "You saved us, Gretel. I knew we'd find a way out." Together, the siblings explored the witch's house, which, it turned out, was filled with treasure. Gold coins, jewels, and precious gems. They gathered as much as they could carry, filling their pockets with enough wealth to ensure they'd never go hungry again. With their newfound riches, Hansel and Gretel set off through the forest, hoping to find their way home. To their surprise, the journey was much easier this time. It was as if the forest itself had decided to help them, guiding them back to the village with gentle breezes and friendly paths. When they finally emerged from the forest, they were greeted by their father, who had been searching for them day and night, his heart heavy with guilt and sorrow. The woodcutter was overjoyed to see his children alive and well, and when Hansel and Gretel showed him the treasure they had brought back, he couldn't believe his eyes. The stepmother, however, had mysteriously disappeared. No one knew where she went, and frankly, no one really cared. With the treasure, Hansel, Gretel, and their father were able to live comfortably for the rest of their days. The woodcutter never had to worry about chopping wood again, and Hansel and Gretel grew up happy and healthy, never forgetting the adventure that had taught them the value of courage, cleverness, and most of all, family. And so, Hansel and Gretel lived happily ever after, knowing that even in the darkest of forests, there's always a way to find the light, especially when you have a brother or sister by your side. The end. Thanks for tuning in. For more enlightening content and a detailed summary, visit www.mybooksummary.com. Don't forget to subscribe and share with your friends. Let's inspire and empower each other. Subscribe to our channel and share our videos with your friends and family.